Her parents sold her because of infertility, until the giant Viking chose her. Lady Alara stood at the edge of the village square, her hands trembling, though she tried to hide it. Around her, merchants shouted, children cried, and villagers whispered, casting sideways glances at her. They didn't dare speak aloud what everyone already knew. Alara was useless. Her parents had never spoken the words of love openly, but their disappointment was always clear. Now, they had done the unthinkable. Sold their only daughter, not for marriage, not for protection, but because she could not bear a child. In the eyes of her village, her womb had become a curse, and her family had chosen wealth over her life. Alara's heart thudded painfully against her chest as a cart creaked forward. It was covered in dark cloth, and a man with a thick gray beard and cold, calculating eyes gestured for her to step inside. She swallowed, her throat dry, and obeyed. The villagers stepped back, murmuring prayers, though for what she did not know. The journey was long and harsh. Rain beat against the cart's wooden sides, and the wind tore through the coarse wool of her cloak. Alara's thoughts wandered to her family, not with anger yet, but with a hollow ache. She had always hoped they would protect her, even in small ways, even with small kindnesses. But this was a betrayal too deep to name. By evening, they reached the edge of the fjord. Dark cliffs rose like jagged teeth against the fading light. The waves beneath roared as though warning them to turn back. And from the mist, a figure appeared, a man taller and broader than any she had ever seen. His hair was as dark as storm clouds, his eyes piercing, and his presence filled the entire dock as if he belonged to the elements themselves. The cart stopped. The man looked down at her with a gaze so intense that her knees weakened. He said nothing at first, only studying her as if weighing her soul. The other men seemed uneasy, glancing at one another, but none dared speak. "You are Alara," the giant said finally, his voice low, rough, but not unkind. "They sold you because you cannot give them what they desire." Alara's chest tightened. She had expected anger, perhaps cruelty, but not this calm acknowledgement. His eyes, though sharp, held a flicker of something she could not name. "Yes," she whispered, her voice breaking. He turned to the men around him. "Leave us," he commanded. Their steps were hurried as they fled back into the shadows of the dock. Once they were gone, he turned back to her. "You may walk freely now. You belong to me." Belong? The word struck her like a knife. She wanted to resist, to cry out, but she was frozen, caught between fear and an impossible fascination. This giant, this Viking, whatever he was unlike anyone she had ever known. His aura was dangerous, yet strangely protective. The journey from the dock to his fortress was grueling. The roads were rocky, twisting through forests of pine that groaned in the wind. Alara tried to speak, tried to ask questions, but he only watched her in silence. Sometimes, when the cart lurched over rough stones, he would steady her with a large hand, and she felt a flicker of warmth despite the cold. At night, they stopped at an inn, a small wooden building smelling of smoke and damp straw. She expected him to leave her outside, to chain her, or to ignore her entirely. Instead, he led her to a room dark and bare but clean. "You will rest here," he said simply. "At dawn, we continue." Alone, Alara sat on the narrow bed, staring at the rough wooden walls. Fear coursed through her, yes, but so did a strange curiosity. Who was this man? Why had he chosen her, not as a servant or prize, but as something else entirely? Her mind raced with questions that had no answers, and yet she could not deny a strange spark of hope. Perhaps her life was not finished, not yet. The next morning the journey resumed. The landscape changed as they moved inland. Snow-capped mountains rose in the distance, rivers sparkled like silver threads, and forests stretched endlessly. The fortress, when it came into view, was terrifying in its majesty, a tower of dark stone, high walls and spiked battlements. It was isolated, almost unreachable, and it seemed to grow out of the land itself. Alara's stomach churned with both awe and fear. They stopped at the gates, which were massive and guarded by armed men. The giant stepped forward, speaking a few words in a language she did not understand. The guards bowed, and the gates opened with a slow, grinding sound. Inside, the fortress was colder than she had imagined. Shadows clung to the stone walls, and the wind whistled through narrow windows. The hallways were long and echoing, lit by flickering torches. She followed him silently, feeling the weight of every glance, every shadow, every sound. Finally, they reached a large chamber. There was a fire burning, though it did little to warm the room. Thorold, her captor, her protector, her unknown, sat at a large table. He gestured for her to sit across from him. "You must understand something," he said, his eyes fixed on her. "I am not like your people. I do not measure worth by birth or by duty. I choose those who show strength, courage, and heart. You have shown something in your eyes that drew me here." Alara's throat tightened. She wanted to speak, to say something clever, to protest, but words failed her. She only nodded. He studied her for a long moment before rising. "You will learn much here. You will face challenges you cannot imagine, but you will survive if you listen and if you are brave." Brave. The word echoed in her mind. She had never felt brave. She had felt small, powerless, betrayed. But now, for the first time in her life, someone had chosen her for more than what she could produce or what she could give. Over the next few days, Alara began to see the rhythm of the fortress. The men respected him but feared him. The halls were full of warriors, some kind, some cruel. The lessons Thorold gave were harsh. She was forced to carry heavy loads, to learn survival skills, to endure the cold that bit at her skin. And yet, with each challenge, she felt a new strength within herself. One evening, she wandered near the cliffs alone, watching the storm toss waves against jagged rocks. She thought of her family, of the betrayal that had sent her here. Tears streamed down her face, but they were mixed with something else. Anger, yes, but also determination. She would not let her life end as a worthless daughter. She would survive. She would endure. And perhaps she would rise beyond what even she could imagine. A shadow fell over her. She turned, expecting one of the guards, but it was Thorold. He stood silently, watching the waves with her. The wind tore at his cloak, but he did not flinch. "You are stronger than you know," he said quietly. "And soon you will need all of that strength. The world is not kind to those it deems weak, but you may change that." Alara looked up at him, startled by the vulnerability in his voice, the weight of his gaze. "Change the world?" she asked. "Yes," he said, "or perhaps change ourselves. The choices we make now will define everything." She wanted to ask more, to demand answers, but she felt the enormity of his presence, the quiet power he held, and the unspoken promise in his words. For the first time, fear was not the only thing she felt. Hope, small but stubborn, bloomed within her heart. That night, as she lay in the cold chamber, sleep came slowly. Her dreams were full of storms and shadows, of towering figures and crashing waves, and of a giant Viking whose eyes seemed to see into her soul. She awoke with the memory of his words and the weight of the choice that had been thrust upon her. Alara knew, with a certainty that scared her, that her life had changed forever. She was no longer the helpless girl her parents had sold. She was something new, something alive, something daring, something that might just survive the storm ahead. And somewhere deep in the fortress, in the shadow of his own fears, Thorold watched, wondering if the girl he had chosen would truly endure. The wind howled again, as if echoing the unspoken promise. The journey had only just begun. The fortress of Thorold rose high above the fjord, its stone walls dark against the pale winter sky. Snow clung stubbornly to the battlements, and the wind cut like a knife through the narrow corridors. Alara had spent her first days exploring the halls with a mixture of fear and awe. Every corner held shadows, every step echoed with mystery, and every glance seemed to reveal a secret world she had never imagined. Thorold moved through the fortress with a power that was almost frightening. Men and women alike gave him space, bowing when he passed, and yet he carried himself with a quiet strength rather than arrogance. For Alara, his presence was overwhelming. She felt small in comparison, yet strangely drawn to the same power that made others step aside. The morning light crept through narrow windows as Tharold entered the training yard. Alara had been waiting, unsure if she should try the exercises he had instructed. The cold air bit at her skin, but she forced herself to focus. "Do not falter," Tharold said, his voice low and steady. He stood at the edge of the yard, watching her every move. "Strength is not only in your body but in your mind. You must control both if you wish to survive here." Alara nodded, gripping the practice sword he had given her. Her arms ached as she swung, her movements awkward but determined. He corrected her posture, his hands firm yet careful on her shoulders. Each touch made her heart race, though she did not understand why. "You are tense," he said. "Let the motion flow. Fear weakens you." She tried again, and slowly the fear melted into focus. Her body began to remember the lessons her parents never taught her. She was learning not just to survive, but to grow stronger than she had ever imagined. Days turned into weeks. The fortress revealed itself to be both a prison and a sanctuary. Alara learned to navigate the icy halls, to speak the few words of the northern tongue that Tharold and his people used, and to endure the rigorous routines he imposed. And yet, the most challenging lessons were not physical. Tharold tested her patience, her courage, and her ability to trust. Sometimes he would ask her to climb dangerous cliffs near the fjord, to cross narrow ice bridges, or to face creatures that lurked in the forest. She feared every moment, but she discovered a deep well of resilience within herself. One evening, after a particularly exhausting day, she sat by the hearth in her chamber, rubbing her sore arms. The fire crackled, casting long shadows across the stone walls. She thought of the village she had left behind, of the life she had never truly lived. A pang of longing filled her chest. Could she ever belong anywhere again? A soft knock at the door startled her. Before she could answer, Tharold stepped inside. He carried no weapon, his expression unreadable, though there was a flicker of something softer in his eyes. "You do not need to speak," he said. "Sit quietly. Sometimes silence teaches more than words." She obeyed, watching him as he moved to the fire. His presence was commanding, yet there was a vulnerability she had not expected. He seemed less like the invincible warrior the stories described, and more like a man burdened by his past. "Why did you choose me?" she asked quietly, almost afraid of the answer. He looked at her, the flickering firelight reflecting in his eyes. "Because I saw something in you that others could not," he said. "Most see only weakness or fear, but I saw courage and the desire to survive, even against impossible odds." Alara felt warmth bloom in her chest, but it was tinged with doubt. "I am not brave," she said softly. "I only try to survive." "Bravery is not the absence of fear," Tharold replied. "It is acting despite fear." His gaze held hers, steady and unyielding. For a moment the room felt smaller, the firelight brighter, and the world outside seemed to fade. The silence between them was heavy but not uncomfortable. It was as if words were unnecessary, as if understanding passed without them. Alara felt a strange trust forming, fragile yet powerful. The following days were marked by growing tension and subtle connection. Tharold began to share small pieces of his past, stories of battles, of losses, and of the curse that haunted his family. He did not speak openly of the details, only enough to hint at the darkness that had shaped him. Alara listened, fascinated and fearful. She began to understand that his stern exterior was not cruelty, but armor forged by pain and responsibility. The more she saw, the more she felt drawn to the man beneath the legend, a man capable of both great strength and deep loneliness. One night, during a fierce blizzard, the fortress shuddered under the wind's force. Alara and Tharold stood near the high windows, watching the storm batter the cliffs. The snow swirled around them like spirits, and the cold was nearly unbearable. "You have changed," Thorold said quietly, his eyes on the raging storm. When you arrived, you were afraid of everything. Now you face even this without hesitation. Alara shivered, not from the cold alone. I have to, she whispered. If I do not, I will be lost. Thorold's gaze softened. We are all lost in some way, he said. But not all of us find someone who helps us fight back. The words hung between them, heavy with meaning. Alara felt her heart thrum in a way she could not ignore. Yet fear lingered, the fear of attachment, of trust, of being chosen only to be abandoned again. Weeks passed, and the fortress became a place of lessons, trials, and quiet reflection. Alara learned to ride the massive northern horses, to read the maps of hidden valleys and rivers, and to understand the ways of the land. She became stronger, more confident, and more aware of the subtle power she carried, an inner strength that Thorold had always sensed. One evening, she walked alone along the cliff path. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the icy fjord. She paused, staring at the waves below, lost in thought. The wind whipped her hair and the horizon seemed endless. You are thinking too much, a voice said behind her. She turned. Thorold stood there, tall and imposing, yet with an ease she had never seen before. I cannot help it, she replied honestly. I think of my past, of the family that betrayed me, of the life I lost. He stepped closer, his eyes never leaving hers. Your past does not define you, he said. Your choices do. And you are choosing to be more than they ever expected. Alara felt tears prick at her eyes. His words were a balm, yet they also carried the weight of truth she had long avoided. She was no longer the frightened girl who had been sold to the highest bidder. She was someone new, someone capable of standing tall, even before a giant Viking. The wind howled again, but it was no longer frightening. It seemed to echo her determination, her desire to face the challenges ahead. Thorold reached out, not touching but close enough that she felt the warmth radiating from him. You are not alone, he said softly. Even if the world believes you are worthless, you are not. I will not let you be lost. The words struck her heart. A mixture of gratitude, fear, and longing surged within her. She wanted to speak, to ask questions, to demand clarity, but the moment passed too quickly. The storm outside mirrored the storm within her, a whirlwind of emotions she could neither tame nor ignore. Days later, a rider arrived at the fortress, carrying a message from her village. Alara's heart sank as she read the letter. It spoke of her parents' regret, of political matters that now concerned them, and of a cryptic warning. The curse that follows him will reach you if you stay. Fear gripped her chest. The curse. She had heard Thorold speak of dark forces, but now the threat seemed personal, immediate. She looked up at him, searching for reassurance. Thorold's expression darkened, his eyes hardening with concern. It is true, he said. The curse of my lineage is dangerous. Those who come close risk being touched by its shadow. Alara swallowed, her mind racing. She had chosen to stay, to trust, to fight her own fears. But now the danger was not just survival. It was something far greater, something beyond her understanding. Yet even as the fear gnawed at her, she realized something profound. She did not want to flee. She did not want to abandon him, even if the path ahead was perilous. The bond between them, fragile yet undeniable, had grown into something that demanded courage, not retreat. Thorold studied her, reading the unspoken decision in her eyes. Then you must be ready, he said, his voice steady, though the tension in his jaw betrayed worry. The road ahead will not be easy. There are forces that wish to see us fail, and we must face them together. Alara nodded, her resolve hardening. She had been chosen once, not for duty or convenience, but for something deeper. Now she would fight, not only for herself, but for the man who had chosen her. As the storm raged outside, the fortress seemed alive with secrets, danger, and unspoken promises. Alara and Thorold stood side by side, aware that the challenges ahead would test them in ways neither could yet imagine. And in the quiet between the wind and waves, An unspoken understanding passed between them. Whatever the curse or the world might bring, they would face it together. The night was long, the winds fierce, and the snow relentless. Yet inside the fortress, in the hearts of the giant Viking and the girl he had chosen, a fire burned, a fire of courage, trust, and the first stirrings of something that could become love. The world outside was cold and dangerous, but within those walls, two souls prepared for the trials to come. And somewhere beyond the horizon, shadows waited, ready to test the bond that had begun to form in the frozen heart of the fortress. The morning sun rose weakly over the fjord, barely piercing the thick layer of snow that clung stubbornly to the fortress walls. Alara stood at the edge of the balcony, staring at the frozen waves below. The letter from her village still burned faintly in her mind, its warning echoing over and over. The curse that follows him will reach you if you stay. She shivered, not from the cold alone, but from the weight of the unknown. She had chosen to remain, trusting Thorold, trusting herself. Yet now, as she looked at the icy expanse before her, fear whispered in her ear. The curse he had spoken of was no longer an abstract shadow. It was a threat that might touch her directly. Thinking again, Thorold's deep voice came from behind her. His figure was tall and imposing, his broad shoulders silhouetted against the pale light. He stepped closer, the snow crunching softly under his boots. Alara turned to face him. "I can't stop," she admitted. "Everything you told me, the curse, your past, the danger, it feels closer now. I don't know if I'm ready." Thorold studied her, his expression unreadable. "Readiness is a choice, not a feeling," he said finally. "You cannot wait for courage to come to you. You must take it even when you are afraid." She nodded, feeling the truth in his words. He had survived countless battles, carried burdens she could barely imagine, and yet here he stood, guiding her with patience she did not deserve. Somehow, his presence was both comforting and frightening. Over the following days, the fortress seemed to take on a life of its own. Strange occurrences began to trouble them, shadows that moved against the light, whispers in the hallways when no one was present, and flickers of cold that froze the breath on their skin. The men of the fortress spoke in hushed tones of ancient spirits and old magic, while Thorold himself grew more solemn, his usual calm replaced with a tight vigilance. One evening, after a long day of training, Thorold called Alara to the northern cliffs. The sky was bruised with purple and gold as the sun set, and the waves below crashed with violent rhythm. He handed her a small, carved talisman, dark with intricate markings she did not recognize. "This is old magic," he said. "It can protect you, but only if your heart is steady and your mind is clear. It will not shield you from fear, but it can give you strength." Alara took the talisman, feeling the rough edges against her palm. "Strength," she repeated. "I thought I had some already, but this feels different." "You have strength," Thorold said, his gaze intense. "But this is something deeper, courage that comes from understanding yourself. You are beginning to see who you truly are." The words struck her, and she felt a warmth bloom in her chest, despite the icy wind. She had always been taught her worth was measured by others, by her parents, by her village. But here, for the first time, she felt her value in her own hands. Suddenly, a shadow moved across the cliff, fast and unnatural. Alara gasped, clutching the talisman. Thorold's eyes narrowed. "The curse," he whispered. "It watches, it tests. You are not safe yet." Before she could respond, a chilling wind swept over the cliff, carrying whispers that seemed almost human. The talisman grew warm in her hand, pulsing with energy she could not explain. Thorold stepped forward, placing a protective hand on her shoulder. "Focus on what is real," he said firmly. "Not what you fear. The spirit that follows me cannot claim what is grounded in courage." Alara concentrated, drawing on every lesson she had learned, the strength of her body, the steadiness of her mind, and the fire of her own spirit. Slowly the wind calmed, the whispers faded, and the shadow dissolved into the twilight. Her hands trembled, but she stood taller than ever. I did it, she whispered, disbelief and triumph mingling in her voice. Tharold's hand lingered on her shoulder. You did not just survive, he said softly. You fought and you won. This is the fire beneath ice, Alara. It is what will keep you alive even when the world seems against you. Days turned into weeks. Alara's training became more intense, not only physically but mentally and spiritually. She learned to read the signs of the land, to sense shifts in the wind and changes in the shadows. Tharold guided her, sometimes silently, sometimes with careful instruction. Slowly a rhythm formed between them, a rhythm of trust, respect, and quiet admiration. Yet as their bond grew, so did the tension between them. Neither spoke openly of it, but the unspoken longing hung in the air, palpable and undeniable. Tharold was a man shaped by solitude and loss. Alara was a girl who had known betrayal and fear. Together, they were discovering something neither had dared to name, a connection that defied words, built on trust, courage, and the shared struggle to survive a world full of danger. One night, as a storm raged over the fjord, Alara sat by the fire, clutching her talisman. Tharold entered silently, carrying a small bundle of herbs and dried meat. He placed it near her and studied her for a long moment. "You are thinking of them," he said softly, his voice low. "Your parents, your village." Alara nodded, her throat tight. "I cannot forget," she admitted, "but I am learning that my life is mine now, not theirs." He knelt beside her, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him. "You are stronger than they ever believed, and stronger than you believe yourself. The world may have tried to break you, but it will not succeed, not while you hold this fire inside." The fire between them was not only in words or thoughts, it was something deeper, a shared understanding that grew with each passing day. And yet the shadow of the curse remained, a silent reminder that their bond, however strong, was not without risk. A week later, as they trained near the frozen river, a strange mist rolled in from the fjord. It was thick and chilling, curling around their legs like ghostly fingers. The air grew heavy, and Alara felt the talisman pulse violently in her hand. "The curse," Tharold said, his voice low but urgent. "It comes now." The mist thickened, and shapes began to emerge, dark, twisting forms that seemed alive yet insubstantial. Alara's heart pounded, fear rising like a tide, but she gripped the talisman, drawing strength from its warmth. "You must stand," Tharold said, his voice cutting through the fear. "Do not let it touch you. Ground yourself in courage." Alara inhaled deeply, recalling every lesson, every challenge, every moment she had fought to survive. Slowly she felt the fear recede, replaced by determination. She raised the talisman, feeling its energy flow through her, and the shadow forms recoiled, hissing like smoke in the wind. Tharold moved beside her, his sword ready, but he did not touch her. He allowed her to face the danger herself, knowing that this battle was hers as much as it was his. Together, they stood against the darkness, two souls bound by trust and courage. When the mist finally dissipated, the river lay silent, the shadows gone. Alara's hands were shaking, her breath ragged, but her eyes were bright with triumph. She had faced the curse, not alone but with Tharold's guidance, with her own inner strength, and with the unspoken bond that had grown between them. For the first time, she understood the true meaning of what he had called the fire beneath ice. It was courage born of struggle, trust forged in trials, and a heart unbroken by fear. That night, as they sat by the hearth in the fortress, Alara felt a quiet peace settle over her. The storm outside raged still, but inside the fire between them burned steadily, unyielding. She glanced at Tharold, who seemed lost in thought, his expression softened by shadows and firelight. "You saved yourself today," he said quietly, as if reading her thoughts. "And in doing so, you changed me as well." Alara met his gaze, her heart stirring in ways she did not fully understand. The bond between them was no longer just survival, it was something deeper, something unspoken but powerful. Outside, the winds of the fjord howled, carrying whispers of old magic and long-forgotten spirits. Yet inside the fortress, Alara and Tharold knew that together they could face whatever came. The curse was not gone and dangers still awaited, but for the first time they believed in the strength of their combined courage. And as the night deepened, the shadows whispered a warning. The challenges ahead would test them further, in ways neither could yet imagine. But for now, in the quiet of the fortress, two hearts burned with trust, fire, and the first stirrings of love that neither could deny. The storm outside raged on, but inside the fire beneath ice glowed bright, defiant, and unstoppable. The fortress was quiet that morning, though the air was thick with tension. Snow drifted lazily against the stone walls, and the fjord below lay hidden under a thin veil of mist. Alara stood near the high balcony, clutching the talisman that had protected her in so many trials. She could feel the weight of the coming challenge pressing upon her chest. Tharold joined her silently, his broad frame a shield against the cold wind. His eyes, usually sharp and commanding, were softer now, tinged with worry and determination. "The curse has grown stronger," he said quietly. "It senses your courage. It will try to claim you both, but together we may have a chance to defeat it." Alara nodded, swallowing her fear. The past weeks had changed her. She was no longer the frightened girl sold by her parents. She was strong, resilient, and ready to face what lay ahead. She had learned to trust herself, to trust Tharold, and to find courage in the darkest moments. "Then we fight," she said, her voice steady. "Whatever comes, we face it together." He gave a faint nod, a rare smile brushing his lips. "Together," he agreed. The first sign of the curse came at dusk. Shadows crept along the icy cliffs, twisting unnaturally, moving like living things. The wind carried whispers, eerie and haunting, filled with anger and malice. Alara felt the talisman pulse violently in her hand, warmth spreading through her like a protective flame. The shadows converged, forming shapes that resembled figures from Tharold's past, ancestors twisted by dark magic, their eyes hollow and accusing. Alara gripped the talisman tighter, summoning all the courage she had built over the past weeks. "Do not falter," Tharold said, standing beside her, sword in hand. "You are stronger than this. Remember what you have learned. Remember who you are." Alara inhaled deeply, closing her eyes for a moment. She pictured the girl she had once been, helpless, afraid, and alone. Then she remembered the trials she had endured, the lessons she had learned, and the bond she shared with Tharold. She opened her eyes, and determination shone in her gaze. The shadows lunged, and the battle began. Alara moved with agility and focus, guided by the talisman's energy. Each strike of her hand, each movement of her body pushed back the darkness. Tharold fought alongside her, his sword slicing through the twisted shapes with precision and strength. They moved as one, their actions synchronized, a silent understanding between them. The shadows hissed and screamed, but the combined force of their courage and trust began to push them back. Alara felt a surge of power she had never known before, a fire that came not from anger, but from the unyielding strength of her spirit. For hours, the battle raged. The fortress walls shook with the force of the storm outside, and the fjord below roared like a living beast. Alara and Tharold did not falter. Even when exhaustion threatened to overtake them, they drew strength from each other, from the bond they had forged through trials, trust, and unspoken devotion. Finally, with a final surge of energy, Alara raised the talisman high. A brilliant light radiated from it, cutting through the shadows like the sun breaking through a storm. The dark shapes shrieked, twisting violently before dissolving into mist. The wind calmed, the whispers vanished, and silence fell over the fortress. Alara dropped to her knees, exhausted but triumphant. Tharold knelt beside her, placing a hand on her shoulder. "You have done it," he said softly, his voice filled with awe. "You faced the curse and you prevailed." Alara looked up at him, a mixture of relief, pride, and something deeper filling her chest. "We did it," she corrected gently. "Together." He smiled faintly, brushing a strand of hair from her face. Yes, together. The storm outside began to ease, and the first rays of dawn illuminated the frozen fjord. The fortress, once shadowed and foreboding, now seemed almost serene. Snow sparkled on the battlements, and the wind carried a sense of peace that had not been felt in decades. In the following days, Alara and Tharold worked to repair the fortress and restore the land around it. The soldiers and workers noticed the change in them, the quiet strength, the calm assurance, and the unspoken bond that radiated between them. The fortress no longer felt like a prison but a home, a place where courage and love could thrive even in the harshest of conditions. One evening, as they walked along the cliffs, Tharold paused, gazing at the fjord. "You have changed me," he said, his voice quiet but steady. "I have lived my life in solitude, shaped by fear and duty. But you have shown me that strength is not only in battle, but in trust, in courage, and in love." Alara reached for his hand, feeling the warmth of his skin against her cold fingers. "And you have changed me," she said softly. "I was afraid of the world, afraid of myself. But with you, I have learned to be brave, to trust, and to fight for what I believe in." They stood together, watching the sun dip below the horizon, casting a golden glow over the frozen fjord. For the first time, the world seemed full of possibility, rather than danger. They had faced the curse, the shadows, and the fears within themselves, and emerged stronger, united, and free. As the days turned into weeks, Alara and Tharold built a new life together within the fortress. They trained, explored, and learned from each other. The bond between them deepened, not just through shared struggle, but through quiet moments, laughing in the halls, sharing stories by the fire, and watching the northern lights dance across the sky. One winter evening, as the snow fell softly outside, Tharold brought Alara to the highest tower of the fortress. The wind howled, but inside they felt safe and warm. He turned to her, his eyes reflecting the flickering firelight. "You chose to stay," he said, his voice filled with emotion. "You faced the curse, you fought with me, and you grew stronger than I ever imagined. Now it is your choice again. Will you remain here with me, building this life together? Or will you return to the world you left behind?" Alara looked out over the fjord, thinking of the village, her parents, and the life she had once known. She remembered the fear, the betrayal, and the pain. Then she looked at Tharold, at the fortress, and at the bond they shared, a bond forged in courage, trust, and love. She turned to him, her eyes bright with certainty. "I choose to stay," she said firmly. "Not because I am afraid of the past, but because I believe in what we can build together. Here with you, I am free. Here I am myself." Tharold's face softened, a rare smile breaking across his features. He took her hands in his, their fingers intertwining. "Then we are truly free," he said. "Not just from the curse, but from fear, from doubt, and from everything that tried to hold us back." The wind outside carried a quiet promise, the fjord sparkling beneath the moonlight. Inside the fortress, two hearts beat in unison, strong and unbroken. They had faced darkness and emerged into light, their bond forged through trials, courage, and love that was unspoken but undeniable. In the days and months that followed, Alara and Tharold continued to face challenges, storms, enemies, and the lingering shadows of the past, but together they were unstoppable. The fortress became a symbol of resilience, a place where strength, courage, and trust triumphed over fear. Alara often thought of the girl she had once been, sold by her parents, terrified and alone. She no longer recognized that girl, except as a memory that had shaped the person she had become. She was strong, courageous, and whole, and with Tharold by her side, she knew she could face anything the world threw at them. One night, as they stood together on the balcony, watching the northern lights swirl across the sky, Tharold spoke softly. "The world may change and dangers may rise again, but whatever comes, we will face it together." Alara rested her head against his shoulder, feeling the warmth of his presence, and whispered, "Together." The fire beneath ice, the courage born of trials, and the love that had grown quietly through fear and struggle burned brightly in their hearts. The curse that had once haunted Thorold was no more, replaced by hope, trust, and a future they could shape together. Outside, the northern lights shimmered, casting colors across the frozen fjord. Inside, the fortress was alive with life, laughter, and the quiet certainty that whatever storms came, they would face them as one. And so, Alara and Thorold began their new life, not defined by fear, betrayal, or curses, but by courage, trust, and a love that was stronger than any shadow. The world beyond the fortress still held unknown dangers, but within these walls, they had found redemption, freedom, and each other. The story of the girl sold for her infertility, and the giant Viking who chose her became a legend whispered along the fjord, of courage, love, and the power to change one's destiny, even in the coldest, darkest winters. And in the heart of the fortress, the fire beneath ice burned brighter than ever.